So we began discussing last week this general introduction to Iyov, who exactly he was, who he could have been. Clearly, the moral lessons in the Sefer itself, the discussions about Emunah, about faith, about our place in the world, what we can and can't question, what's considered questioning too much, what are the concepts we just aren't built to understand or to be able to comprehend. And the discussion began with the very difficult events that take place effectively a few paragraphs into the book itself, where permission is given to the Satan to strike Iyov, his family. As a result of this permission, he loses his children, he loses his livestock, he loses his wealth, his social status, his social standing. That's right. Can you give the name?
Yes, I have it in my
Sorry, Night Shiur was sponsored for the health and success of. So Israel ben Masha and his mother Masha bat Chai.
Let's talk first.
So
Yes.
So what exactly does this mean that there's a discussion, so to speak, between the angels? What exactly is an angel? Might be a better question, a little bit more general. What does it mean that the Satan asks for permission and then gets it? That he, surveys the land looking for potential victims, I guess, is what it sounds like. And at the end of the day, permission is granted. Why on earth would this happen? There's a very crucial understanding when you're learning Tanakh. I missed this a little bit last week, but you really have to understand that if something is written, it's there for a reason. And it's there because either I couldn't have understood it without it being there, or because if it weren't there, I would have understood something else. So it could be that this comes to teach something that we may have thought things happen in a kind of random, unstructured way. So Satan is out there, whatever the Satan is, doing all this damage and creating all of this harm and heartache, etc. And I wouldn't have known that there's such a thing as a hierarchy, there's such a thing as permission being granted or denied, for that matter. And lo and behold, this is how the interaction is described. So the Satan appears in the context of a meeting of sorts, a convention of angels, malachim. And after a certain survey of the land, comes to the conclusion that Iyov is a righteous man. He believes in God. Hashem considers him faithful and trustworthy, and he avoids evil, he avoids negative things. And the Satan starts this discussion as to, it's easy for him to be righteous when he has everything that he needs, when he's wealthy, has his family, etc. Give me a few minutes with him, and you'll see that he'll change his attitude. Just give me a shot. Let me take a couple of swipes at him, and you'll see that the guy will change color. So, meet the devil. What exactly does this mean? What is this coming to teach us? Why is this in our Tanakh? What on earth does it mean for us that this discussion transpires, that it takes place? So, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim gives an explanation on this topic of angels, and he explains that angels are not entities the way we sometimes tend to believe. Look at European art. If you want a classically idolatrous understanding of you see these angels, naturally they're all blonde with halos over their heads. No one with brown hair could really qualify as an angel. So and they have blue eyes, of course, naturally. So this is absolutely absurd. The fact that angels are referred to sometimes in somewhat anthropomorphic terms, that it sounds to us like they're being described as we would describe people, is a little bit tricky. The Rambam explains like this, Maimonides, in a very classic discussion he has about angels in Moreh Nevuchim, where he explains that none of these discussions, none of this, be it any of the prophets, and just as much in Iyov, none of it is to be taken literally. Taken literally, it's idolatry. Period. That's it. Angel appeared to someone, and you believe that this angel that's in question is a human being, someone tangible, someone that we could look at, touch, taste, smell, feel, etc. Then you're completely off your rocker, according to the Rambam. You have effectively transgressed this interdiction of making spiritual concepts physical. And he mentions that it's possible that they appear as people in some kind of prophetic vision. It's possible that they appear in a dream, looking person-like, looking as if they were people. You could interact with them that way. Interacting with something that has no physical shape or form, a little bit frightening for those of us who aren't used to it. Thank God I am, so I'm not so put off by it. But when you have to receive a message from the non-physical world, Malachim, explains the Rambam, are think of lines in a computer program. It's maybe easier for us in this generation to appreciate that. If I program a line, a little bit of code to a computer program, and I say, compute some kind of function, and if this is what was like, I didn't see basic, this is like A basic, the computing of the 1970s. If the result is anywhere between 20 and 29, we used to do, then green. Then I want something green to show up or appear. So it's automatic. The computer has no free will. The computer is not going to choose to do or not to do what I commanded it to. It's just going to execute what it is that it's told to do. It's automatic. Anytime this rule is fulfilled, it's satisfied, the result is going to be what I programmed it to be. I can change the program, but as long as the program stands as is, this is what's going to happen. This, explains the Rambam, is an angel. An expression of Hashem's desire, the way Hashem wants the world to be, in a kind of automatic fashion. So it's not, to use a really poignant example, let's like the US federal government, for a perfect example of something monstrously inefficient and ineffective. You have decisions that are made by a group of people who come and go, Senate, House of Representatives, etc. And by the time a law is passed, until it's actually carried out, it has to be signed by both houses, especially if it has anything to do with funding. It has to go through the House of Representatives. And then you'd have committees and subcommittees. You'd have different people, elected officials, unelected officials, who would be responsible for codifying it, carrying it out, etc. And maybe 15 years later, something will actually come of it. There are no intermediaries in this equation. Hashem wants something and it happens immediately. But it happens in such a way as to be dependable, reliable, almost reproducible. Might be the good term. In other words, Hashem doesn't need angels to do His work. Everything could, in theory, be done by Hashem Himself. As a matter of fact, that rings a bell. That's something you may or may not be familiar with from the Haggadah on Pesach. Where we say that Hashem came to Egypt, right? The Midrash is a very fascinating explanation of this Ani. Hashem says that I came to save. So Ani v'lo malach, Ani v'lo saraf, Ani v'lo shaliach. So Hashem el HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvodo ba'atzmo. So when Hashem says I came to Egypt in order to live, so Hashem moved, like took a cab or the train, or what mode of transportation? How come up until now Hashem didn't do and all of a sudden did? So the Midrash says this is Hashem by direct veto, by fiat, by executive fiat. No intermediary, no intermediate steps, no permission being asked for or granted, as we see here. Hashem, as if to say Hashem Himself. So the question is why? What happened specifically with leaving Egypt that this needed to be the case? Why is this different from anything else that we've seen up until now or since? So the answer is, as explained by the Rambam, Hashem created the world and obviously doesn't need it or us or anything in it. We created it such that we would be able to have free will, that we should be able to learn, to study, to ponder, to question, etc. And in order for us to make any sense of the world, it has to be somewhat consistent. Somewhat consistent. There are no shutdowns of the non-physical hierarchy. So, if, for example, Hashem wants the world to be such that when a seed is planted, something sprouts from it, the Gemara will give you an expression along the lines of the following, right? There is no such thing as a plant that grows without an angel standing above it or tapping it and saying, grow. Okay, so if I were a European artist, I would draw many blades of grass, lots of blonde people sitting there and hitting it or yelling at it, and then a lot of their schools look like that, probably still do. This is how the world really works. If only I were a prophet, I would know to see these little blonde smurfs or gremlins that yell at the grass and make it grow, because obviously if you want anything to work out the way you want it to, you have to yell at it. So what does that mean? What was the Gemara talking about? That really, my kids would hear something like this and say, no, I want my little sister to do something, I know exactly what I need to do. And here goes. So the expression is such that it teaches you that Hashem wants the world to be in such a way, and therefore there is a malach, there's an angel responsible for it. And every single little detail of the world has an angel responsible for it. Not that there's by the way, malach in Hebrew, again, just to clarify the crucial importance of etymology. Melacha. Right? There are 39 forbidden forms of work on Shabbat, and they're referred to as melacha. So malach would be, by etymological definition, those who carry out the work of Hashem, those who fulfill Hashem's orders, those who carry out 39 forms of productive, constructive work we can't do on Shabbat.
What's the melech?
Hashem's work is like this. Right, melech in the sense that, yes, the etymology would still remain true if the aleph is a variable. Then, in the sense of melech, in the sense of hierarchy, of superiority. So I can't change the malachim. I'm not one of them. I don't interact with them too regularly, anyway. I would like. But you have only to accept what the malachim do and to function within this framework. So what is the purpose of a malach? Hashem doesn't need a secretary. So the Rambam explains, this is in order for us to begin to understand how the world works. If there are seeds and you can plant them and they grow, and you plant a lot of them and you have a lot of plants, and you don't plant that many, you don't have that many, there's a system. The seeds need water. Every plant in the world needs water and soil in order to live. Some of them grow without that much soil. But then plants that grow without soil, they're kind of mushrooms, they're all different categories. So what do all these details mean? Who needs this? Why couldn't plants just grow when we want them? Or we yell at them and shout at my plants and make them grow, and it doesn't work that way. So this is for us to scratch our heads and to ask questions and to understand. Hashem created the world in such a way that without water the plant won't grow. I can have great soil, I can be a really nice guy, I can be mean, I can yell at it, I can hit it, I can cut it, none of it's going to work without the prerequisites being attended to. Spiritually speaking, there are rules to the world too, just they're not as tangible, not as visible, not as palpable. So people who do good things, generally good things find them. Sooner or later they will. It doesn't always happen right away. People who do bad things, eventually bad news catches up with them. Recently spoke on the phone with someone who owned a certain meat processing facility and thought he was going to make a ton of money doing this and that and the other thing, tried to cut some corners, and in the end lost a few contracts and ended up not being able to pay his bills. So we had a significant quantity of meat that basically sat there and started to decompose, and he thought he would keep it a secret. So the winter was cold in this particular area, and then the meat defrosted and added the bacteria that decomposed it. It was this nasty biohazard of a system. So okay, in the beginning you were cutting corners, cheating here and there, and in the end the entire world found out about what you did wrong and why, because a public issue. Another item from current events, if you follow the news a little bit, was a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. There's a few rabbis that are implicated in this, I guess it's a scandal. I mean, they were paying people to coerce recalcitrant husbands into giving a get. But it says the Gemara that they did used to do this. It does say that this was how they handled certain things. The only scandalous part of that, I shouldn't say this, but the only scandalous part of this whole story, because there are plenty of men who deserve to be raked over the coals, and I'd volunteer to do it. What bothered me was that they were taking money for it. I said, that's it. I don't think this would have happened. I don't think such a scandal would have erupted from it had it not become a business. If you're doing it for the right reasons, really it's terrible. This is when we're being tortured, so you do it. I know you have to make a living. I do too. You'll find another way to do it. It's just when these details come out that something wasn't 1,000% squeaky clean, then eventually it catches up with you. So the prophets would describe this in terms that we as human beings can understand. And in order for us to understand them, they would use anthropomorphic terms. So when you do something crazy and you miss the divine expectations of you and your potential, I created you, don't tell me you couldn't do better than that. So the Navi might say something to the effect of Hashem was angry. Not Hashem was angry because Hashem has an ego and we insulted him and he likes to play the tough guy sometimes. No, that's how people behave. The Navi uses the terminology angry, upset, or Hashem taking revenge, so to speak. It doesn't mean the way you see little simple people do. Using terminology that you and I can understand in order that we should appreciate how these actions and reactions and interactions in the physical world work. In other words, if I raised a child and my child happened to be running amok and a behavioral catastrophe in the school and disrupting the class and bothering the teacher, and then I get emails and phone calls and text messages about it, it's a purely hypothetical situation, never transpired. So, I'd be disappointed. Why would I be disappointed? Because I pay tuition. So it's a money thing? Well, it's a little... Yes, that doesn't make me happy. But it's more than that. I know my child. I raised him. Let's assume it's a boy. I raised him. I have expectations. I know his potential. He's very clever. So he's clever. He can find solutions to things. And he can also find really clever ways to irritate his teachers and the administration and the students and the janitors. So my disappointment with him is going to be different from anyone else's disappointment. The teacher has a job and she tries to do it, and she may not want to continue after this year, but we'll find another. I'm more disappointed than anyone else because I'm invested in this kid. I know what he can do and what he can't do. I know what he's capable of, and I know how irritating he can be when he chooses not to listen. So, not angry in the, you did this to me, so I'm going to do this to you kind of way. Or, I paid tuition, so I'm taking the money out of your college trust fund. Yeah, I have one of those. It's not, I want to get even with you, you hurt me, so I want to hurt you. It's that really abstract, there's some tremendous rift. There's an entire valley between what you're doing and what Hashem knows you can do. And the only way that we can appreciate this as human beings, by comparing it to situations that we can kind of understand. So the prophets aren't giving you anthropomorphic ideas. Please think of people, blonde ones preferably, and compare and contrast with your own experiences. No, it's just the only way that we can appreciate these things. If we had some kind of human reference, anyone can appreciate what it's like, since we all have, at least had parents at some point. We can all appreciate what it's like dealing with your parents, taking orders and having to fulfill them. Then you grow up and you have kids, so it becomes what it's like having kids, where you invest everything in them, and they say really disrespectful things to the teacher that cause you to waste a half a day at work, at school, having to have conferences, etc. I know someone who had such a thing happen to him. So the Nevi'im use these references often enough. This is the only way that we can actually appreciate and understand what's going on in a world that we can't see. Matter of fact, since the Rambam, when it comes to prophecy, everything the prophet sees is somehow, in the prophetic vision, he or she does see things. You might see things that look like people, but have to understand that they're angels. Just you can't see angels because you see a line of computer code, and you can see what the screen shows you. It's what the processor is doing or trying to do or wants to do. But in theory, it's just numbers and letters that you type and they pop up on the screen. It's not them, it's not their essence. So it helps to think of in digital terms to appreciate that. So The prophet might see something, but know that it's not what you see that counts. It's what you can divine from it, what you can abstract from it, what you can, what's the message behind this whole thing. Because it's not like I'm watching a video on YouTube and this is what Hashem wants, like I'm being entertained. There's a message here, figure it out, you have to unravel it, you have to decipher it. So, all these situations that involve malachim have to be looked at this way. Hashem could have done this otherwise. It's not that Hashem needs permission, or that this is a soap opera or a cartoon episode. There's a message behind all of this. The Maharani probably explains like this. Tremendous commentator and Kabbalist from the 16th century, late 15th or 16th century, a giant and a real genius who had a knack for explaining these abstract concepts in very abstract ways, but they make more sense than they originally did, and he leaves a lot to the imagination when he does this. So he explains that if you have a situation in which, for example, by us, the Satan needs to ask permission from Hashem, what the prophet is trying to tell you is that the Malachim do not act of their own free will and volition. They need to conform with what it is that Hashem wants. And so you as a person can understand this, just like when you're at work and you want to requisition a faster computer so you can get your work done even faster. Well, you're already paying me a salary, you have a little bit of money in the budget, so it's worth it for me, it's worth it for you. Why not? Let's submit a form and we can try. So the Satan, just like any other angel, will let that out of the bag. The Satan is actually acting in the pleasure of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, technical legal terminology. Serves at the pleasure of means can make things happen or not happen. Hashem could veto, so to speak, some kind of a tendency that wouldn't be in accordance with what he wants. And so the permission that he asks is just an indication of the fact that this is how Hashem wants things to be. So it's not that Iyov is an exception, that he was singled out and that no one else ever had to suffer in human history. We know that not to be true. It's that this all happened with Hashem's consent. And so as if the angels convene, meaning this information is shared freely and instantaneously, there's no reason, they don't need text messages, emails, or a boardroom in order for information to pass, so to speak, in the non-physical. It's all there, it's the world of truth, everything is clear. But we would see this as if there are two opposing forces, and so the Satan represents that force which challenges, which tries to get us to doubt and to question, etc. And permission is given, permission is granted. The Gemara's expression about this is nitna rashut lemashchit lechabel. Permission was given to the destroyer to destroy, to cause damage, to create doubts, to inflict wounds, to cause suffering. And this is what life is all about. Not the suffering itself, but how you come out of it. We've all gone through difficult situations in life. Right away, lesson learned. Before we even start the rest of the book, you cannot possibly see these things outside of the context of what Hashem wants for you. How come my friend is married and I'm not? How come they have kids and we don't? How come their parnassah is working and mine isn't? Automatically, this is about 10 verses into the book, the Satan got permission to do this. In other words, this is how Hashem allows for the world to work and how Hashem allows for people to be tested. This is not, God forbid, outside of the confines of what Hashem would like the world to function like. So it's not, why did she take this, or why did he get that, or why did I lose this, or why did he gain that? Hashem brought a challenge your way. It's with Hashem's permission that these things happen. Things that you maybe thought were yours, that you owned, that belonged to you, that were due you, may on occasion disappear or get damaged or be stolen, etc. People and things die, and that's a part of life. The real challenge of life is how you deal with it. Everybody goes through difficult situations. The question is how you handle it. That's what the rest of the book is all about. That's Iyov's challenge, is how do you digest this? Is there such a thing as injustice? Could this have happened without Hashem wanting it to? If Hashem wants it to, is he out to get me? Is that it? Is it just torture me until I die? Well, then kill me now. He says this. I'm better off not having been born. He comes to his conclusions very quickly. That's like the first 2 chapters. He's already talking this way. Terrible depression. But this is exactly the conundrum. How can it be that Hashem created the world and He's just and He's righteous and He's perfect and all these seemingly imperfect things happen? Was it something I did, or is there such a thing as random testing? In industry, you have such a concept. You produce, a funny example, but I still smell like cherry wood smoke. Producing sausages, so if you're making a batch of, let's say, 50 or 60 of them, I'm not going to sit there and stick a thermometer in 100,000 different places. I mean, once you smoke it to a certain temperature, you do what's called a spot check, or a batch test. I check one or two, and I can assume the rest of them are fine, they're okay. So maybe it's a little bit unpleasant for that one sausage that has a thermometer stuck through it, but how else do I know the rest of them are ready? So, okay, it's a random thing. So, some tests, some trials and tribulations seem a little bit more direct, as if to say this was engineered. It's like sabotage. How did the Satan know that this was the perfect day for me to get a flat tire or a fight with my boss? Or I walked in late and for the first time in a year he noticed, things like so. How could it be? Bounce check, legal action, whatever. So sometimes it really feels like something very direct was decreed upon you, and it's a difficult position to be in because you start asking yourself all these questions. What did I do? What did I say? Where did I go? What could I have done to avoid this? Could I have avoided this? Does it matter what I do or what I say? Etc. Here's a beautiful parable from the Zohar HaKadosh on this topic of the Satan, and it really hits home. It appears in Parashat Pinchas. We mentioned this before, I think a year and a half or 2 years ago. Parashat Pinchas has some fascinating discussions in it. The parasha itself begins with discussion of Pinchas, what exactly happened, why promiscuity and sexual misbehavior are such a terrible form of destruction, and how it's so contrary to what Hashem wants the world to be and to be like. And Zohar gives the following parable. Just take it for what it's worth. A very, very righteous and genuine and honest and hardworking and caring king. There is such a thing. There were in his general, not many, but there were such a thing as kings. Has one son, an only child, and he knows that it's time for him to pass on the reins, to give his kingdom over to his successor, and he wants to make sure that he finds the best successor because he loves his subjects, he loves the people in his kingdom, wants them to prosper, wants them to be safe, to be happy, to be healthy, wealthy, etc. So he says, no, the easy way out of the situation is to give the crown to my son, but I don't know if my son is the right guy for the job. I love him, I invested in him, pulls off some shenanigans in school, but he's got a lot of potential too. How do I know that my son is going to be a good king when I'm no longer here? Well, I guess I have to put him to some kind of a test. So...
No, I was just saying you don't.
You don't. You can try. Ever vote for a politician and then get upset with the results? Ever vote for a politician and not get upset with the results?
Better.
So the king comes up with an idea. And he says, I need to test my son, but a real test, not just a simple kindergarten test, a real test. And I need to see how my son reacts, and if he capitulates, if he gives in to the temptation, or if he withstands the trial. So the king doesn't go to his advisors, doesn't go to his accountant, to the philosophers, to the theologians. Where does the king go in order to test his son? He goes to the outskirts of town, and he finds a woman who works in the industry of tzniut. Okay, I guess that's a test. In fact, if you follow political news from now back 2,000 years, it's a tremendous test for many men who are involved in public office. So the king finds this woman. He chooses not just any woman, but he chooses the best and the brightest and the most talented and the most capable, and he tells her, listen, I know up until now you were basically independent, running your own show, but from now on, I want you on my payroll. I'm paying you a salary, and you have one and only one mission, and that is to tempt my son and to get him to fail, get him to sin. You need to seduce him in any possible way, and I give you a budget. buy the nicest clothing, you buy the best of perfumes, you buy the nicest jewelry, fix up your hair, your clothes, your accessories. You go all out. You pull no punches and you leave no stone unturned to find something that can test, seduce, tempt my son. You do this and only this. I'm going to pay you a salary that you've never received before in your life, even if all the political well, these members of my cabinet happen to have issues, etc. So you're going to be working exclusively on this. This is your job. And Zohar leaves the parable there. So he says, no, this woman who, on the one hand, is pretty detestable, potential homewrecker. I mean, we don't need society looking like this and people caving into temptation and people profiteering off of other people's bad inclinations and unfortunate instincts and exposing people's weaknesses, etc. But at the same time, this most despicable of women happens to be the superhero of this story. It almost doesn't even matter what the son does. In this particular context, nothing, kingship wouldn't be possible without her involvement. And so she is one of, if not the most beloved and precious employees of the king. Because this is the only way he can make sure that his son is fit to, resume the kingship once he himself retires. So is she not precious before the king? Is she not a loyal employee, a loyal servant of the king? It's a little bit funny to think about that, but loyal, trustworthy, hardworking. Is she not one of, if not the most precious officers in the king's government, to such an extent that you would even think what she's doing is more important than many of the officers and ministers and diplomats in his kingdom? So this whole concept of the king and the kingdom and these other officers and diplomats and agents, etc., is what the parable is aiming at. Hashem has many angels who are responsible for lots of things. The Gemara itself says the Satan is Malach HaMawet, is the angel of death, and is Yetzer Hara. It's all one and the same. The force of destruction, the force of temptation, of seduction, of confusion, and at the end of the day, what causes death? And we read a few weeks ago, Parashat Bereshit, how death came upon humanity pretty quickly, but this came along with the physical world being created and our joys and challenges and making sense of it and finding our place in it, knowing where, how, where, when, etc. to interact with it. So there is no entity outside of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is no being besides God making decisions. When we're told by the Navi, by the prophet, that the Satan asked for and received permission to do this, the point is that this is very much how Hashem wants the world to look. We get upset about the money, we get upset about his physical health, about his mental health, about his children who died, how and why that happened. We'll talk a little bit next week. Clearly, it wouldn't have been killed just in order to test him. There must have been something else going on. But the timing of it, and the catastrophic results, and everything else that happened in almost in one breath, basically one day that it happened. This was all allowed to happen. Hashem wanted it. We can't say Hashem wanted it to happen. To say that Hashem enjoys calamities and catastrophes and disasters. But Hashem wants these things to be able to happen. The world is such that yes, people can make choices. They have free will. They can choose to do good or bad. There are real consequences to these choices because this is really how you make yourself befitting of a portion in Olam Haba, in the world to come. These tests are real tests, and these questions of Emunah are real questions. And if there wasn't room to ask, we would all be pre-programmed to do the right thing all the time, never to doubt, never to despair, never to lose our motivation, and that's exactly what it's all about: motivating yourself, inspiring yourself, overcoming these challenges, and making the best spiritual sense that you can out of the world the way you do or don't understand it. So this is a really crucial aspect. It's not that, God forbid, you're talking about Lego figures on a table and can I do this? Yeah, you can do that. Can I try this again? Well, you can do this, you can do that. We're talking about Hashem wanting the world to be this way. Maybe not in perpetuity, there are discussions about time periods, in which this may not apply. Soon enough, time Mashiach, things might start to change. But for now, this is how Hashem wants the world to be, and the Satan is not acting independently or outside of the context of what Hashem wants the world to be like. And permission was granted to test. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's more intense, less intense. Might last longer, might not last as long. But this is the ultimate point of Satan's involvement. A loyal servant of Hashem, an angel for all intents and purposes. Maybe not blonde, but definitely one that carries out what Hashem wants the reality to look like. Who executes perfectly, basically, what Hashem wants him to do, and therefore leaves us room to work and improve. Yeah.
But does it make any difference the fact that is the Satan who takes initiative in this case? Like, I understand the fact that he is a tool in the hands of God, but in this case specifically, he raises the idea.
Right. So in the prophetic analogy, he's described as the one who requests permission. So Maharali Prague, for example, talks about these concepts in the context of us asking Hashem to be merciful, that Hashem should not judge and be merciful. In other words, as if Midat Hadin and Midat Rahamim are fighting with each other. As if, the attribute of justice and the attribute of judgment, the attribute of mercy, patience, are playing ping pong, and whoever wins gets to make the decisions. So what he explains is that these are different aspects of godliness that are constantly in tension, right? Different strings that are constantly being pulled on. And so what happens, you perceive a certain angle of it, you respond or react to it in a certain way, but these forces always exist. So gravity always exists, right? Let's call gravity one of the malachim. You can live with gravity. Sometimes you try to exempt yourself of it. You can jump. You can jump really high. I know somebody who jumped too high and then damaged one of the tendons in his knee. Okay, there's only so much you can do to escape it, maybe temporarily. Picking things up is a challenge to gravity. You're fighting, nature. It doesn't mean that it's bad or good. It just means that you're dealing with one of these divine rules for the creation. So anytime you choose to behave in any particular way, you're basically going to encounter resistance. Put it that way. If you have all these different malachim and all these different attributes of godliness, your job is to decide which one applies in which situation. So if your son disappoints you in school, well, you can be judgmental, you can be strict, you can be patient, you can be tolerant, you can be merciful, understanding, sympathetic, furious. Any one of the above could qualify as a typical response, and your job is to find the best response that depends on the context and the people involved, on your expectations, the potential, etc. This is why these are divine concepts, godly concepts. You can influence the mode of interaction between you and Hashem. So when you say that you ask that Hashem should judge you mercifully, or that Hashem shouldn't judge you, at least temporarily, you're asking for a temporary reprieve of something that's naturally supposed to occur, and you're involving the veto of a natural divine force, let's say. Because Hashem constantly judges. Does it need Rosh Hashanah in order to judge you or me or anyone else? So what does Rosh Hashanah mean is a great question. We'll talk about this some other time. But we need it anyway. Left to its own devices, Midat Hadin, the attribute of justice and judgment, would judge you and would exact punishment. And if you make special efforts to be less deserving of punishment, or to at least prove that you're going to do things in the future that would make you less deserving of punishment, then Midat Hadin can be suspended by Hashem in favor of Midat Rachamim. So, as if to say, the judgment is always there, and only Hashem can veto it. And mercy is always there, and Hashem chooses where it applies and where it doesn't. So the same way with the Malachim. There are Malachim that would like to, so to speak, that would naturally make good things happen. Those would naturally make bad things happen. And your job is to hopefully invite more of the positive influences, less of the negative ones. It's a kind of technical way of understanding the way we interact with Hashem. We don't do enough talking on topics of this kind. So we just kind of assume, in some instances, maybe it's a little bit silly or childish, but we kind of assume that, if I plug in this plug into that socket and that light goes off, and then Hashem, likes me and forgives me. It's much deeper than that. It's not as simple as we make it seem. You need to exert energy, to use your power in order to change these things. And when I say power, I mean because you're fighting something that's naturally there. Here's another way of looking at it. How come the Satan up until now wasn't able to do this? I'm sure if Hashem created this force to test us and to challenge us, then at any given moment of any given day, He would have wanted to destroy the world. So this force is somehow held in check and held in balance. Maybe it's not even so much a question of getting permission as being released, as the obstacle being, unchained. That's it. For half a second. You have expressions like this in the Midrashim. Baruch Nefesh is in the Midrash. This talks about Hashem. When David Melech describes, David Melech describes the sea and how the sea is constantly, as if, so to speak, struggling to reclaim the land. These waves are constantly washing over the shore, and then every so often you hear something like a tsunami, or a superstorm, or a storm surge. And so what was that? Was it something unnatural that, the water just came up so high, or would the water have done this at any opportunity were it not bound by gravity and the tides, etc.? So the expression of the Midrash is Gvul Santa Bali'avuron Bali Shavon Chasot Haaretz. So David Melech, looking at the world in this kind of photo-negative way, if not this, then this. Hashem created the world, and He separated the land from the sea, and He put a boundary to the oceans and to the seas. So you established a border or a boundary that they shouldn't cross, the waters in plural. They should no longer be able to cover the land the way it was at some point in history. So the Midrash says, you should know that were permission granted for even a second, water would destroy the entire world, reclaim all of the land, and wash everything away. So you have the Mambul, you have the flood. What does that mean? All of a sudden, was this a proactive decree on Hashem's part? I want the water to come up and take away all this evil, all this corruption, all this despair, and this depression, and this lack of control? Or is it more just a matter of removing the boundary and letting it happen on its own? Sounds kind of semantic, you would say. What's the difference between throwing something or pushing it off of a shelf, or removing the shelf? But that's the way you kind of have to look at it. Certain situations would warrant or merit a certain kind of interaction, and a prophet, a Navi, would know what's going on, where to focus in tefillah, what mitzvot could be done, what averot to prevent in order to prevent such disaster from happening. But there's a difference between proactively pushing a button and then just, opening the door and letting things happen automatically. Topic we'll pick up. We got some next week. So we take a few minutes, please. There's food that's getting cold.